normal gait pattern. We don't really need to teach that specifically. Let's go here first. So, if I am using bilateral device, particularly crutches, allows me to do all of my gait patterns pretty much. So when I'm breaking down gait patterns, I like to think about 3-point gait patterns first. All 3-point gait patterns require that there is some sort of weight-bearing deficit. So if I am non-weight bearing, I am using a 3-point gait pattern, and the easiest way to remember that is 2 crutches or 2 sides of a device and 1 foot. So that is going to be 3-point, non-weight bearing. This is what you've seen a lot of people doing after their ankle injuries, knee injuries that maybe required surgery. That's pretty simple and straightforward. Our gait patterns will have modifications. A 3-point modified gait pattern would be I am now partial weight bearing. So there are a bunch of different types of partial weight bearing. Have you guys seen this one before?
Yeah.
What is this one called? Toe touch weight bearing. Even if a doctor's orders tell me toe touch weight bearing, I am not going to teach my patient to do that. Why? So if you're just doing, I can teach my patient how much pressure to put down, and if you're just doing the toes, it's kind of hard to put much weight through there, so that is actually okay and safe.
It's a bad pattern.
Yeah, this does not look like normal walking, does it? No, not at all. I'm actually going to likely increase the risk of developing a plantar flexion contracture by being in this position all the time. So as PTs, what we like to teach is something more like this. What would I call this? So I am doing heel to toe. That is something that I would want to teach my patient regardless of what their gait pattern is. But am I putting much weight through my leg right now? So this is going to be called a touch down weight bearing. So you're making full foot contact, but I should still, what I'll tell patients is I should be able to pull a piece of paper out from under your foot. If there was a cracker on the ground, you wouldn't break the cracker. So you're touching the foot, but you are not bearing any weight through it. So this would be like a less than 1% weight bearing. That's where a lot of patients will start. Some patients might, or when they start weight bearing, they'll usually start there, and that is just an opportunity for us as therapists to get some normalization to that gait pattern. Again, really focusing on heel first, then toes, and then trying to get a decent heel lift. I wouldn't call this a push-off with the toes because then patients would think about putting weight. So I would think about landing with the heel first and then lifting the heel first would be how I would tell my patient to do that. And then some doctors will do 10%, 20%, like that's a little crazy in my opinion, trying to teach someone the difference between 10 and 20 and 30% weight bearing. Generally 25, 50, 75% are all easier concepts to teach your patient. If you have a scale, you can use your body weight and have them put some pressure on the scale, and 25% of your body weight pressing onto the scale is one way to teach it. The other thing I'll do is I'll have them stand on their one leg. That's all of your body weight. Now just start to shift and trying to kind of guesstimate. Just putting a little bit of weight would be 25%. A moderate amount of weight would be 50%. A fair amount of weight, but not putting your full weight through your leg, would be like 75. And then obviously if you're 100% weight bearing, then you're putting full weight on the leg. There's plenty of different ways you guys can teach that. You don't need to use the terminology I just used. Has anyone had other methods of teaching weight bearing status? I know you guys have said you guys really haven't done a lot of that. Do you have anything for that?
Usually I do the potato chip, but the 20 also, when you're teaching and demonstrating the gait patterns, Dr. Barker did a good job about doing the swing through pattern. Typically we'll see patients or students not do a swing through. They'll do kind of like a step 2, and we want to provide a good demonstration and example. Like that would be a step 2, and we want to avoid that because we want to normalize gait pattern as much as possible.
Thank you, Lizette, for bringing that up. Usually this is my biggest pet peeve with gait training. So if you're not cueing a step through during the practical, even if you demo it and your patient's not doing it, again, it's your job to correct that and normalize that for your patient.
And don't be afraid to interrupt them, even if you're like halfway through the gait pattern. Just let them know, okay, let's stop. Let's go ahead and do the swing through. But you got to make sure to stop them and do it correctly.
So the reason that a lot of patients will do the step 2 is because they're going to take a big first step, potentially with their affected leg, and then because they don't want to bear that weight through there, they do this step 2. So what I'm doing here is a long right step, and my left step is matching my right step, but it's not at all symmetrical. So especially patients who, maybe they're even full weight bearing and they just, are taking that big step with one foot. What I want to think about is keeping the stride length the same, but making the step length symmetrical. So if I'm stepping about one box here, what I would say is take a small step with your right foot and now get your left heel past your right toes. So now my stride length is about the same, but this is gonna look way more like normal walking. And then from here, I can start cueing my patients. Okay, now take a bigger step. Now still get your heel past your toes. And maybe it's not 100% symmetrical. My right step is still longer than my left right now because my left heel is getting just to my toes. My right foot is coming a little bit further. But this is gonna set my patient up for much more success in the future than doing one of these. Once they get really into that habit, it can be hard to break and it can take a long time to normalize the step length and make that symmetrical. Make sense? So the 2 things you should be looking for on the practical, regardless of the gait pattern, heel down, heel up, and symmetrical step length.
Would it help to eventually transfer over to just one crutch on the affected side? And would that help with getting back to normal gait?
So that's going to be a lot more just based on diagnosis, progression that you're going through with your patient. Generally, we want our patients to be as independent and mobile as possible. So one crutch would be more independent and mobile than 2. But for what we're teaching right now, again, regardless of the device, regardless of the gait pattern, regardless of the diagnosis, these concepts you should always be teaching your patient. Make sense?
Your gait pattern would change at that point if you're trying to go into a more unilateral, just like one crutch. Then it would no longer be a 3-point gait pattern. It would be a different gait pattern.
So what I've been demoing right now has been that it's a 3-point modified. So remember, 3-point, it has to be bilateral device and I'm non-weight bearing. So if I'm not non-weight bearing, then I'm not teaching putting the foot down anyways, and you're not really even worried about the step length. What I will want you guys to teach, if it's a 3-point gait pattern, would be when you step, you're gonna swing your foot forward and then you're gonna swing your foot back. So it's like you're taking a step, but you're not bearing any weight. So again, going through as similar of a motor pattern as you can to set up future when they are, or to set up success in the future when they are bearing weight again. Make sense? So 3-point, non-weight bearing, 3-point modified is any weight bearing restriction, but they are bearing some weight. There's one that we did not talk about, and that is going to be weight bearing as tolerated. So technically with weight bearing as tolerated, that is still a weight bearing restriction. So I would be thinking about still using a modified 3-point gait pattern as opposed to one of the other gait patterns we're going to talk about next. But again, it puts you in a gray area where if they are bearing decent weight through that leg, you could talk about using one of these other gait patterns that we're going to talk about moving forward. So again, crutches, very versatile. I can teach the other gait patterns with this as well. So the most stable gait pattern for someone who is not, there is no weight bearing restriction, would be a 4-point gait pattern. So again, with crutches, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So assistive device, contralateral leg, opposite assistive device, contralateral leg. This is going to be a little bit slower, but again, it's more stable when you're first teaching someone gait who's maybe not very strong, they haven't been up walking in a while, you don't think they're quite ready to be moving faster. Again, we're always trying to progress our patients, so the progression as far as gait patterns go, from a 4-point would be a 2-point, and that would be moving opposite crutch and leg together simultaneously. So obviously this is going to be a little bit more functional, but it requires a little bit more balance and coordination. Another consideration would be mental status. So, you know, your patients who are post some sort of brain injury might have a hard time kind of coordinating, getting the feet moving at the same time as the legs. So that's where we would break it down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go nice and slow for your 4-point. And then after they get comfortable with that, we would then think about doing our 2-point. Modifications for the 2 and 4-point gait patterns is just removing one crutch. So if I am using my crutch on my left side, what is my affected side going to be?
Right.
Very good. So the assistive device always should be on the opposite side of the affected side. Sometimes patients think, oh, I should use it on my affected side, but then that's causing you to bear more weight through the affected side and likely is going to increase the risk of falling. So a modified 4-point gait pattern is going to be 1, 2, and then for some reason I always do I Dream of Jeannie, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that 3 is basically non-existent because there's no device on the other side, but this is not a 3-point gait pattern. Make sense? So it looks the same as doing the 4-point. You're moving one at a time. You just removed one device. Same thing for our modified 2-point. I'm going to move the crutch or the device and my opposite leg at the same time, but there's just no device on the other side. So that's modified 2, modified 4. And then with my crutches, hemi walkers, these would all always, unless you're using 2, it would always be modified 4, modified 2. Make sense? And then, if I am using a walker, what are my possible gait patterns?
Push.
So what do we call this one? Relatively walking. It's a relative gait pattern. So this, I just call it normal gait with a front wheel walker, but there's also a term called unspecified gait because the assistive device is involved, but you cannot do a 4-point, 2-point, 4-point modified, 2-point. You cannot do any of those with a walker. So if there's no weight bearing restriction, it's normal gait with the walker, unspecified gait with the walker. Those are your two options to call it, but it's the same thing. So on your written exams, it could be either of those, and you can clarify with Dr. San Lucas if for some reason normal gait would be classified something else on your written exams, but as far as we're concerned in here, you can call it normal gait or unspecified. And then are there any other gait patterns I can do with the walker?
Walker, step.
So that's what we just did, right? Walker, step, step, that's normal gait or unspecified gait. We said we can't do 2 or 4. Well, that's what I'm doing. We don't ever want a step 2. Step 2 is not like a gait pattern you should be teaching your patient. Step 2 is like a characteristic of stepping that we want to avoid. What are our other options for gait patterns?
So with the wheels, maybe not, but once you're using the 4 column, it's up, step, step, step.
Even if I'm using the standard walker, it's going to be the same thing where it's normal walking with the walker or unspecified gait. So that's not a different gait pattern. I'm still bearing weight through both legs. Did we talk about any other gait patterns today?
What needs 2 devices? Like he's using both arms.
What gait pattern did I teach first?
3-point.
Yeah, so 3-point. I can be non-weight bearing on one leg and using my walker. You guys are gonna try all these. These are it's pretty stable. It's pretty stable.
5 more.
5 more?
Trainer mode at the same time.
And then I could also do my 3-point modified. So 3-point modified is gonna look pretty similar as normal walking. But that's because it should be, because we're teaching them to do a step through gait pattern, and they're putting all 4 or both extremities down, but there's just a weight bearing restriction. Makes sense? Okay. Do you want to talk about sizing again?